Hello and welcome to the Humanity Inspires podcast. I'm your host, Mark Philpott. Howdy everyone and welcome to the show. It's great to have you back. If you've listened to the show before, if you're a first timer here, welcome. Humanity Inspires. It is what it says. We're here to try to inspire, motivate and educate people about anything to do with anything on life. So our conversations are not scripted in any way. My guest and I do not know what we're going to talk about before the show starts, and therefore it could end up in any direction at all. If you're looking for other podcasts to listen to, then head over to the website at www.humaneity.com. That's spelled Humaneity.com. You'll find the previous episodes I've done of this show. If you're looking for something on travel, maybe travel's your thing, head over to theglobaltravelchannel.com. Theglobaltravelchannel.com is my show where I talk to guests all over the world about their amazing travel experiences. And we don't just talk about travel destinations, we get up close and personal and find out how travel has changed people's lives as well as their perception on the world. And then my third show is my business show that's called theglobalbusinesspodcast.com. I get to speak to business owners and business leaders across the world about how they're navigating the stormy waters of COVID-19 in the economy and what innovations and ideas they're coming up with to get their businesses on track. So there we go, a host of different podcasts for you to listen to. Now, let's get back to Humanity Inspires and let's go and meet our guest for today. He's currently based in Australia. In Ugarte, welcome.
Hi, how you going?
Well, I was a little bit worried I was going to be late to meet with you today because I was having I was having an ice shower on the back of the boat. And I was standing there in bliss for I don't know how long, probably 20 minutes. And I thought, I'm really enjoying this. But whoops, I've got to go and have a chat to Ian. So I got here in time, mate.
So ice shower as in Wim Hof method or because you don't have hot water?
No, I do have hot water, but it's purely the Wim Hof inspiration that got me into it. And it's been on a year now and absolutely love it. Fantastic.
It's really an interesting concept because, I've been doing it for a while as well. Not methodically, though, I have to say, because I do love my warm showers. However, that ability to be able to create DMT within your own body naturally is a really phenomenal thing if you can grasp the concept of doing it.
Yeah, and before we have all the cynics who are listening around the world, I hope we don't have too many cynics actually listening, but for those that are listening who are cynics, we all know that Wim Hof didn't invent this. It was, it's been around for centuries, but he's a man that's brought it to great awareness, we could say, across the world at the moment in these relevant times. So
I think the aspect of that too is that the work that I've done in different spheres, different people, different outcomes. So whether it be David Data and doing intensives with him and meditations and breathing with him, whether it be a 11-day or 10-day technique. It's 10 days, but it's actually 11-day Vipassana silent meditation. They sneak that 11th day in there without telling you. But, all of the breathing techniques are almost essentially the same. And unfortunately, particularly for men, what I've noticed over time and having worked with them directly too, is that they do a lot of chest breathing and not lower diaphragm breathing. And so that doesn't create the connection sensitivity from the chakra at the top of your head to the chakra at the base. So you're right. I mean, he's not the only person that's ever talking about it. It's just that he's been able to mainstream it. And I did go and see him live in Melbourne.
Right.
Being in the industry that I'm in, obviously, I'm a property developer, plumber and builder and teacher, but we run seminars. Being in the seminar industry, it was it was like watching a kindergarten show go on. It was very ridiculous. They were so disorganised and there's no script, and he does whatever he wants whenever he wants, and no one microphone worked. It was disgraceful, but the guy was interesting, and it was a great little seminar in the end.
He's got a compelling story. Do you know the story about his wife?
His wife, yeah.
Yeah, tragic.
Wife, through depression, I think she's suicided, I think. Was that right?
Yeah, she jumped off a building.
Yeah, gosh.
And he watched her.
Are you kidding? I didn't know
No,
that.
he was there, yeah. He saw it happen.
Oh, man.
Tragic.
Yeah, it's just, but again, to be able to use a breathing technique to release endorphins, DMT, serotonin, everything I just think we underestimate what our bodies can do sometimes. So,
yeah, I want to go back to what you said about having cold showers, but also having hot ones. Have you found a difference when you kind of go for a period just having cold versus implementing the hot every now and again? Is there a noticeable difference?
Christine's probably a better question on that one too, because I'm an all or nothing person. Hey, I'm in all or out all. And so for her, she's been doing it. She's noticed a remarkable change. I've never been able to grasp the concept of enjoying it, I have to say. As much as you say that you're enjoying it a lot. Christine's also says she just loves doing it. She's actually Christine's really quite upset with me. We've just moved into the new house. And being a plumber, there's things that you pick up over time where you go, I'll never do that in my house. And so one of the most annoying things as a plumber for me is to have your tap underneath your shower head.
Right.
You have to reach around to try and get, reach around doesn't sound quite right, reach around to get the temperature right in the shower, and then you can step into it, and it becomes very awkward. So I've always put, for my own properties, I've always put, and the ones that we develop as well, I've always put the shower tap handle away from the shower head. She's very upset because she can't go between hot and cold without stepping out of the water. So she's upset with the new bathroom, so she's showering in a different bathroom.
Well, she shouldn't be upset, because if she steps away from the water, she's going to get instinctively cold anyway for a moment or two, isn't she?
I would have thought so too, but I wasn't about to argue with her. We've had an interesting few months.
Oh, okay. Relationships, they're always fascinating things, aren't they?
They are. It's more learning about me than it is about her, I have to say.
Yeah, we were talking just before we came on air about that, and I've got a situation in my life. In fact, I'm going through a bit of a therapeutic process at the moment, with writing a book about my father's passing, and the flip side of that is the relationship that I have with my mother. And I'm up to the stage of the book where I'm actually writing about the moment I arrived back from the hospital, because my mother actually wasn't even there when my father passed. I'm up to the stage where I arrived back at the family home to inform my mother that my father had passed away, and that's probably going to be the most challenging part of writing the entire book for me, is that chapter alone.
Because of your mother's reaction? Or
Yeah. The reaction.
I could only say that there was a sense of relief for her. Was that probably...
Yeah, and I was... I vividly remember the driving back from the hospital and not having anything scripted in my mind of what I was going to say or how I was going to approach the idea. I just let it all go very naturally. And to be honest, I was still wrapped up in the grieving process of just watching my father pass away, right? So I hadn't even thought ahead of what was next in terms of that conversation. But as soon as I opened up the door and, I hadn't rung from the hospital either, so she didn't know until I arrived there that it was all over. And I don't know whether you can form these things in your subconscious. I guess you do, in terms of what you think the outcome is going to be of that conversation. Mm-hmm. And I very much went into the room thinking, okay, well, this, everybody's going to be in total grief and it's going to be horrible and all the rest of it. But the fact was, it wasn't like that. And it was a shocking surprise to hear, okay, now I can clean out the wardrobe and get on with life,
Wow. It's an interesting concept, because, and I'm not sure that completely relates to your mother, but we do have a fraternity of Australians that are now finding themselves homeless based on the fact that they were told when they were, young women, were told when they were somewhere between 18 to 25 that you need to go and meet a good man that's got a good job, and you'll look after the house and home, and he will provide for the family. You'll then have children and you'll provide for them, and the money will come in through him. And I think because it's such a complex conversation. I mean, you're in the middle of writing a book, perceptions that you had. I also sit on the fence there, and I wasn't involved in that situation, but I sit on the fence for these women that are now finding themselves later in their life with no super, with a consideration that they're unskilled, or if they were building a career, it was cut short for children, and then they're apparently damaged goods if they try to get back into the workforce. And then they find themselves out of love and just rolling through the events of the day. And I know for Christine and I, it's really painful to hear this for me, that Christine and I almost separated a year ago. Actually told me she wanted a separation a year ago, and I fought hard to become better in what she was required. But a year ago she said to me quite simply, and again, preconceived perceptions, that 3 out of our 4 daughters, our youngest one is probably too young to probably form too much of an opinion, but she's 10 or 11, and still in love with me as a father and as a figure in her life. But the other 3 daughters had said to Christine, just leave him, he's a dickhead. And that's a really confronting thing to hear. Where your own daughters are saying, Mum, you're better off without him. And I'm not saying that that's what happened with your mother, but I do know that from the 55 plus women that are always looking for accommodation around the place, that's a story that comes up quite often, that they probably stayed on and hung on for too long.
You went quite public with that a year ago, if I remember, about that situation, and I'm interested to know, how was the impact on the social media judgment on that for you?
I think we did have the critics out there. We had a couple of critics out there basically saying, oh, Ian, you're putting your life out there and you're paying for marketing to show people that, you've changed and you're better and all the rest of it. I think everyone's changing. I think everyone, there's very few people that I could look at and say, oh, there's part of you that needs to be better. And so for me, I don't for one single moment promote myself to be anything of any greatness whatsoever. It's, if anything, I certainly, one thing I always say to people is, don't you dare ever put me on a pedestal, because as soon as you put me on a pedestal, as soon as you see one of my flaws, that's a big drop for me. And it may not hurt me physically, but emotionally it's going to hurt you, because you're going to see a person that's flawed. And I went public with that for 2 parts of it. The first part of it was that I was so devoted to running businesses and driving myself into the ground to make sure those businesses are successful that I missed the one thing that was really important, and that was the time with my family. And, I was fortunate that, I've got videographers that work in my business. I was fortunate that we caught that one part of me devoting time to my back then 10-year-old daughter who couldn't ride a bike. I hadn't done the thing that every father should do for their child, and that's teach them how to ride a bike. And so we were lucky to have caught that moment and that situation, and the smile on her face. And I still get emotional just talking about that one day. And for Christine, that was an extremely emotional day as well, because she was so conflicted about having asked for a separation, and here I was doing the things that she'd always longed for and asked for me with a family. And so I had done an extreme change within a short period of time. So the one thing for me is that if I don't see the flaw, it'll continue. If I see the flaw, then it can literally, in my non-conscious mind, change overnight. I can flick a switch. In this occasion here, what was creating the disjoint between Christine and I was the parenting styles. And we've been working with a Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. She's a psychologist in the US, and she's a child specialist, I suppose, a parenting specialist. we've been working on, the styles of how you parent, and if you hated the way that you were parented, guess what? You're a good chance that you're gonna parent exactly the same, and you're gonna pick one side of the equation. You're gonna be the over dominant, controlling type figure, or you're gonna be the softer, caring figure. And so Christine and I are extreme polars. So when they say you marry your father or you marry your mother, that's exactly what we did. And it's becoming more and more difficult nowadays because we are so extreme, which is why we're continuing to work on this part of it. But we are now back at a point where we're sort of, what do they call it? Conscientious parenting, where you're living in the same home. The relationship is not really a sexual relationship. It's more about a family relationship and working to that. And, we want to make sure we involve the kids in understanding that it doesn't need to get nasty. It doesn't need to have a split completely. I suppose the biggest part of this is going to be if we do decide to romantically separate, what happens when a third person comes in via either not me finding a partner or Christine finding a partner, and how does that actually fit into a household where we're still living under the same roof? I don't know how that's going to plan out. And I'm not saying that that's the way it's going to go either, because we are continuing to work on how we adjust with the family.
There's a lot of stuff there. So let's go back to the beginning. How did you and Christine actually meet each other?
Oh, well, we've actually got a story. So if anyone ever asks me, how did you meet Christine? I'll say, remember the old People magazine that had the home girls in the back? I don't know. You didn't stay in Australia for too long. You haven't been in Australia that often, have you?
People magazine, what's that?
People magazine was sort of like a light, really, it was sort of a mixture between Women's Weekly and Penthouse. So, if I can put it that way. So it had some really light porn stuff in it, but it was more about, sort of a page 3 girl setup, and out the back there was home girls, and so someone would send in a photo of their girlfriend with their top off, so you could see her boobs or something, right? And so people would say, "How did you meet her?" And I would say, "Well, actually, I saw an ad in the back of People magazine where Christine said she was looking for a really strong ethnic man." And so I answered that, and they go, "That's bullshit." And I go, "Well, she's across the room, go and ask her." So we'd already set this story up so that she would actually agree to say that. And people were amazed, but it's not how we met. That was just a story for a bit of a laugh. The way we met was that while I was at TAFE, I had one of my mates, Mick Murray, who was engaged, but he'd never lived outside of home. And he was 25-ish, I suppose. He'd lived with his parents his whole life, and then when he moved to Sydney, he moved in with his grandparents into their granny flat. So he wasn't really ever outside, and his grandparents did a lot for him. So he wanted to move out, ensure he knew how to do things, wash clothes, wash dishes, keep the house, all that sort of stuff. So it was a pretty mature thing to do, to firstly move out, see what it was like, and then move in with his fiancée. So he moved into a flat, and the flatmate was Christine. Now, I was going to TAFE with Mick, and Mick rang me one day, says, "I've got to move out." Oh, sorry, I'd gone over a couple of times, and I'd just done a remedial massage course, and I was designing my business card on and how, so that I could, start promoting the massages that I wanted to do. I'd actually heavily involved myself in natural therapies from about the age of 19 after I wouldn't say a massive health incident, but enough to be able to knock on the door and say, do something about it. So I started to work in that, and then I said, I don't mind this, I'll start doing this. So I went and did a remedial massage course, and then herbs and anatomy and physiology and biochemistry. And so I'm pretty close to a qualified naturopath with all the different courses I've done, including a diploma in colonic irrigation. So when I say I'm a plumber, I'm seriously.
That's handy. Yeah. I'll give you a call next time I have a blockage.
You certainly don't want to come to me when there's a blockage. It's too late. Well, you've left it too long, I should say. But I've actually got a machine here at home if you ever do want to come and have a lie down. So I was in there one day in the flat, and Christine wears glasses, and she came in, and she sort of came in a mixed room. She goes, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "Oh, we're just designing this business card for whatever." And she looked at it and she saw the logo that I designed, and over the top, "Oh my God, that is so fantastic! She's so fantastic!" And I thought, "Whoa, that's a bit too much for me to handle." Anyway, so I got a call from Mick. "I need to move out. Can you help me move some stuff?" So I said, yeah. He was on the 3rd floor at a flat in Coogee, so I helped him move some stuff out. And I said to him that day, I said, "Mick, what do you reckon my chances are with Christine?" And Christine is 5.5 years older than me. So when you're 21 and someone's 26, you're going, "Oh my God, like there's some experience going on in there." And Mick says, "Man, I don't want to know about stuff like that. If you want to ask her out, ask her out." And I said, "Okay, all right, sorry." Anyway, so he rings me again the following week on the Monday. He says,
Mick's a real Aussie bloke, huh?
He's a
don't want to know
blokey
about
bloke.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, he's a blokey bloke. But Mick is actually a sheep in wolf's disguise, I suppose. No, wolf in sheep disguise? Well, no, the other way around. He's a nice guy. And so he rang me the following week and he said, "Ian, I didn't get to move the fridge. Can you help me?" And I go, "Yeah, no worries." So he arranged for me to be there at 4:30 in the afternoon. I knocked on the door and Christine opened the door. And I said, "Oh, I'm here to help Mick move these fridge." And he goes, "He already moved it." And he says, "But he did say that you were coming." And I went, "You cheeky bastard." So I took Christine down for a drink to the Coogee Bay Hotel on the 23rd of December 1997, I think it was, 1996. No, 1996, 23rd of December, we had our first technical date. I went out with my cousin and we went with his partner, we went out to the Coogee Bay. Christine wasn't allowed to come to the yearly Christmas Eve do that we have at home. We've got 44 to somewhere between 44 to 54 Europeans that meet on Christmas Eve at one of the houses somewhere in Sydney to celebrate Christmas, but she wasn't allowed because I'd only really just met her. So one of my cousins said, "Where'd you sleep last night?" And I said, I slept on the couch at Christine's place. So for a couple of years, her nickname was the couch in my family. Being Europeans, they go hard at stuff like that. That's how we met. That was the Christmas of 96. 97, we moved in together in March, and we bought a house together in June, I think. My deposit, because I'd saved a lot of money, and she brought some income, and we bought our first house at Barrow Waters on the Hawkesbury River, which was an awesome place to start a family.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a journey. So it's over 20 years that this has been going on.
Yeah, we're coming up to, I think we're 23 years married. We actually had a surprise wedding. So being a boat access property, we created a housewarming party. We had some houseboats sitting over at the public wharf. People turned up at a certain time, and we brought them over to a housewarming party. We provided the meat, and everyone brought their own dish. So whether it be a salad, but green salads are banned. Anyone comes to my place, if they have to bring a dish, green salads are banned. That's not a dish. I'm sorry. That's going and stealing stuff from the garden. And so, look, I reckon that's such a bad thing. Anyway, so they all came over. It was pouring, and so we had tarps set up and whatever because people were going to get wet. And we had arranged for a marriage celebrant. I went around, picked up the marriage celebrant. It was pissing down, like it was coming down hard. I came around the boat. We're in a boat, obviously, because you can't drive your cars there. Came around the point, and this massive strike of lightning hit in front of the boat. It like blinded me for 3 seconds. It was so bright. Anyway, so I get the marriage celebrant. We were supposed to get married on the pontoon, and I said to the celebrant, "We're not going to be able to do that. It's pissing down rain." We went up. I got dressed with my best man, and in that 20 minutes, the skies opened up. The blue came out. The sun came out. And I walked out onto the pontoon. I had my dad and my mum there, and Christine walked down. And it's really such a beautiful, memorable day. I always remember looking up at one of my mates that I went to school with and looking at the look on his face, and he was just beside himself. He said, like, these guys are getting married. We did tell my family, my direct family, so my parents and my brother and sister knew, and Christine's father and direct family knew, but no one else knew. My cousins didn't know anything. No one knew anything. And I remember turning around to my dad, who was in tears, and we're both really emotional, and he was crying, and I said, "Are you crying because you're happy, or you're crying because you're sad?" He goes, "I don't know," because at that point in time, Christine had stole me away from the family. We got an Australian that married into a Spanish family. I'm Australian born to Spanish migrants, and she stole me away from them. So I worked with them, I socialised with them, I lived with them, and all of a sudden she's taken me an hour out of Sydney. And I think in hindsight, they'll get rid of me in a second and keep her for sure.
So how's it feel? That's quite a story. How's it feel reflecting on all that now, given where you're at in the current situation?
Certainly, it's tough, isn't it? It's tough. Last night in the middle of a dream, actually, so for the last week or two we've been talking about, so we haven't slept in the same bed for about a couple of weeks now. We're sort of just seeing where it all sort of lands at the moment. And
is that a significant milestone for you guys? Like I look at the fact that there's millions of couples around the world that don't sleep in the same bed together. So is that a significant milestone for you guys particularly? Is it?
Yeah, it's relatively. It's pretty significant. It's the first time that we've both consciously said, well, okay, we're going to sleep in separate beds. I mean, for me, I'd be still comfortable with her being in the bed, but it's a decision that she's going, well, I think it's better for now. We're working obviously with Dr. Vanessa on that at the moment. She said, don't go making any major decisions for the next few weeks. We just got to work through everything, and we've got to get to the point where we're going to get to. But yeah, it's been significant, and the major change for me is, look, I said that I'd talk about anything, and I think Christine would be comfortable with the fact that I talk about it as well. But we've got a really strong. So we've got 4 daughters. Number 1 and number 3, Shania and Macy, are essentially my makeup. They look like me. They have my personality. They have my character. And then number 2 and 4, Keely and Leora, are really a Christine. They've light-coloured skin, curly hair, and have a little bit of shyness that Christine used to have. Number 1 and 3, Shania and Macy. Shania tested us for a period of time there. Quite strong personality. Couldn't really, here I am as a controlling parent style, trying to dominate and make sure she falls into line. She came good. It took her maybe 9 months to 12 months of going through a pretty frantic time when she was 14, 15 years old, which most, girls do. They have that rebellious streak. Keely, number 2, sort of went through it for 3 months, and it was fine after that. She still has the don't talk to me, don't look at me sort of attitude every now and then, which I'm learning more and more to be accepting of rather than being confronted by. And then Macy's come along, and Macy's just an extraordinarily intelligent, challenging, testing type of person. And I don't have any doubt that she'll take over our business. I mean, I've said that from a very young age. And I look back at my parenting, and I'm really confronted about some of the things that I've done and the way they've done it. Now, I'm not talking about physically abusing them to the point of bruising and whatever, but I've been working more and more with Macy lately, and there is a point to this story. I'm sorry, I could cut stories shorter if you want, Mark. But I've been working with Macy lately. When she was pretty young, she didn't fall into line with one of the controlling habits I was trying to make her act in a certain way. And I took, every child has that one little thing, that little bear. And actually, I've just found a bear that I was given, that my parents bought for me when I was young. And it's falling to bits, but it's mine, right? she had this little bear that she grew up with when she was younger, and I don't know what age she was. She would have been maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she didn't do something, and I took that bear and I went and threw it into the rubbish bin, and it's gone. And I've taken that, I took that away from her, and it's affected her in a really, I can only presume in a non-conscious mind, in a really awful way. And I look back at those things and geez, oh God, I wish I could change the way that I parented early on to how I parent now. I obviously parent very differently now, and that's such a difficult thing to console with. And so here we have, Christine and I adopted a rule in our household that said, okay, no piercings and no tattoos while you live in my house. I'm okay once you're outside, you can choose to do whatever you want, but just for now, because of the way that I think, and that's not to say that people with tattoos and people with piercings are bad people, it's just my upbringing, my rules in my non-conscious mind. Macy had been pushing for a long while to get a nose ring. We're not talking about anything drastic here, right? So we're not talking about nipple piercings or anything like that. We're just talking about a little stud in her nose. But we continue to say no and no and no. And then Christine, out of the blue, I came out of a team meeting and she goes, just to let you know that Macy's going to be coming home with a nose piercing. And I said, well, okay, we're going to have to take something away from her being a disciplinary type parent. And Christine then revealed, she says, no, I actually gave her permission to do it. And I said, so you didn't involve me at all in that decision-making process? And she said, you would have said no anyway. And that was really this trigger to this next level of where do we go through from here. And, that's a bash on my ego. And so maybe, I'm sure there's people listening going, what a dick. Like, seriously, is that all it's about? But I am who I am, and it's a challenging process. So last night I had that dream where she then revealed again in my dream, yeah, it's time. And again, every time that when I heard her say it a year ago, it was no, this can't happen. This is not right. It can't happen. And I fought for her back then. And last night in the dream, and that same feeling rose up through the middle of me. And I went, well, clearly there's something still there that says that I need to work on myself to make sure that we as a family make this work. But one thing we don't want to do is be unhappy. Like, what's the use of being in an unhappy family to get to the point in time where if, and no disrespect to you or your mother, where one of my daughters, and actually this brings up another point, where one of my daughters tells Christine that, Ian just died, and she goes, oh, well, that's good. At least we can clean out some stuff now. One thing that is very strong on Christine's mind, and one thing that really made a big impact on me, which is actually which made the change of my thought process, was that when Christine's mother died, her father said to Christine, I should have treated her better when she was alive. And she said, I don't want you to be in the same position that if I pass away, that you or Ian say to my daughters, I should have treated Christine better when she was alive, because she said it made such a big impact on me, and I really ended up starting to hate my father for saying that thing to me, and I don't want your daughters to do the same thing. So that was a pretty big impact on me.
Got a couple of sharings that I'd like to throw at you based on some of the things you've been talking about. The first one is, from what I know of you, and we've known each other for a couple of years, on a sense of doing a few things together and conversing at different times, and I could almost call you a regular on the podcast shows now. So, going back a year ago when this first milestone occurred, and you turned around and your immediate reaction was one of fighting and putting good and trying to rebuild and those sorts of things. Do you think that was part of your competitive nature? Because I do see you as a competitive, fairly sort of guy.
I think, is it a competitive nature?
To say, I don't want to lose here, I want to win this, I've got to make this right, Was that part of the fabric of what made you dig your heels in and try to improve things?
It's a question that's allowing me to ponder. I think when that statement was made to say it's over, it was You could say that it was a competitive thing. It was really a control thing. No, I can't allow this to happen because that's beyond my control. And so I will fight to make sure that I'll do whatever I can do to make sure that the relationship is back in control.
Would you say that it's a moment in your life where you felt more out of your comfort zone than anything else that you've been doing?
Having been to a point of 12, having been to a point of being 12 hours from committing the act of suicide, that was probably the most uncomfortable period in time in my life. I would dare say that that would come pretty close, Mark. Yeah, I agree. I agree that that was a really impacting time. Fortunately for me, I was around. I was actually at an event with one of my mentors. It was a 3-day event, and fortunately, the universe played it out in its way where that happened on the Friday night, and my mentor absolutely kicked my ass for 2 days. Like, there was not one point that he made on stage at that event that wasn't directed at me. And that was an interesting outcome because from the perspective of the event, where there were other people in there, the backstory that I asked about was, it felt like he was talking to me, and they said he was. We'd actually organised it that way. Other people got a lot out of it, but you got your ass kicked. And effectively, that's what really saved that marriage. And a year ago.
So it was someone else's intervention that made you wake up a bit.
No, it was someone else's intervention that made me realise what I hadn't seen before. Remember, I said I can change literally overnight, literally a split second. It was that made me realise that that situation. And so it was fortunate that it was in that place, because I would not have, knowing the ups and downs that go on for me, every now and then, whether it's, I can't say that I actually ever checked whether it's a moon cycle based thing or not, but one thing for certain is if that hadn't happened at that event with him giving me that ass kicking, it could have been a very dark spiral, which is why I'm saying that I think your query of was it the most uncomfortable, it could have become the most uncomfortable period in my life, yes, but because it was in that situation where I was made to see the light, then it made a big difference.
Some people listening might say that your ability to be able to switch the light switch, so to speak, from one behaviour and feeling sense to another may indicate that the true sense of how you're feeling is not being adequately communicated in a certain way. That one would say that when you actually love somebody else, that feeling is core and central to your being as a person, and the ability to switch that on and off like a light switch is maybe not authentic. What would you say to that?
No, so the light switch on and off is not the light switch on and off. It's actually a switch to say that if I switch, so the lighting path at the moment has been that if I turn that switch on, that turns on the light in the lounge room. The flicking of the switch for me means that we rewire that switch so that when I turn on the switch in the lounge room, it no longer turns the lounge room light on. It actually turns on the light that is the right place for it to be turned on, because it was never right in the lounge room.
Okay, got it. I'm glad I clarified that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that too, because the one thing that I still haven't mastered yet is what I say and what I think are two very different things, and what comes out my mouth, which creates, just within my own team, creates a lot of friction, because I'll say something meaning something else. They'll either take it the wrong way or they'll listen it in a way and they'll act on that. And so that's something I still haven't mastered yet. And the thing about that is that I sort of had 3 phases of personal development in my life. My first one was when I was still at school. I was 14 or 15 years old and went to an all-boys private school in Sydney. I don't have a hard luck story. When I was younger, I had a perfect life. It's a middle-class family, got everything I ever asked for. I went to a private school and we're boys, and they decided it was a Christian Brothers school, so we had a priest and a missionary who created this group of, they picked out 2 individuals from our classes. So we had basically 14-year-olds in a room that would meet once a week, and we'd just talk about stuff. And little did I know that the name of this program was called Behold the Turtle. And little did I know what it was about. All we were doing was, well, as far as I knew, it was like 2 periods off every week, which I didn't have to turn up to, which was awesome. And during these weeks, we got to a point where we're sitting in the chapel, and the priest said, "Has anyone here, thought of a situation where they feel like they're being judged?" And I as a 14-year-old, said, "Yeah, like sometimes I say things, sometimes where people, reject it." Where I might be in a class where I don't quite understand something, I ask for it to be repeated, and someone laughs at me, or I listen to a type of music and someone says, "Well, that's crazy, that's stupid." And it would happen to be that those 3 impactful situations were actual real situations with, by chance, 3 boys that were in that room. And one of them looked at me and says, "Do you really feel bad when that happens?" Like, I feel awful. And the room had this energy shift almost immediately of empathy that I'd never felt before. I'd never actually felt anyone in my school comfort me in a way without saying anything. It was just foreign to me. And I came from, as I said, I come from a Spanish family who you sort of really hide your emotions as much as possibly can. And, guys are guys and women are women. And I remember the missionary looking me in the eye and going, "Behold the turtle." In that moment where this hard exterior was broken down and the soft and tenderness of that person inside that hard shell finally brought himself out. And so I happened to be that one person in that room that there could have been any one of us, but it was me that came out and showed that softness. I do remember going back to class that afternoon and being really, really angry, really, really angry, like I'd never felt before. And I don't know, what a crazy reaction that here I am, I just spilled my guts, but now I'm angry. And, in hindsight, it was because I'd let someone see the soft side, and that's a weakness. I've always been taught that was a weakness. How could you show emotion and tell someone that? Because now they're going to use it against you. So that was the first point of personal development. And then I sort of didn't do anything until I met a mentor who's still my mentor, the woman who taught me how to do colonic irrigation at the age of 19. I'd had a long-term girlfriend. I'd split up with her. At the age of 19, I had a semi-professional sporting contract to play football, what Australians know as soccer. And in the pre-season, I just couldn't get fit. And as you said, I've got a hard competitive streak. So when I go out and train, there is nothing there's no 90%. There's full on 100% the whole time. Couldn't get fit. So I went and saw a naturopath, and she looked in my eyes, iridology, and she says, you've got a lump on your shin and you've got a sore knee, and I've got tracksuit pants on. I go, how does she know that, right? She's looking in my eyes and telling me I've got things wrong with my body. That was enough to get my attention. And then she says, you've got some organs that are just not performing as good as they can, and so I want you to go and do a yeast-free diet, and I want you to do this, and I want you to take these vitamins and this medicine, this alcohol-based herbal medicine, and I need you to go and get some colonics done because your bowel is full of toxins that are fully full on. And so I went and got a colonic irrigation, and I met the poo fairy, Annette. I lay on the table, and I had this uncomfortable process done to me but it felt right. Like, as far as I reckon I could do this for other people. And I said to her, do you ever take on classes? And she goes, yeah. So she taught me how to do that. And that colonic irrigation course was not a colonic irrigation course. It was a personal development course to really knock some shit out of me, literally, and then also emotionally, so that I could deal with other people's crap. And funny story on this one too. There's a whole bunch of acronyms that we would write on cards to explain what was going on, and she revealed these acronyms during the course. And FIH is one of the acronyms. And so I go out and I go and pull out my card to see what acronyms she wrote around me, so that I could work out what she thought about me. And there's FIH. And I go, you've written FIH? I was confronted, and she goes, yeah. So FIH is effed in head. So I went, but you wrote that about me. And she goes, yeah, because you were. And that's why when we worked with you, we got to that point where we were comfortable for you to do colonics on other, because you started working towards yourself. So I thought that was 19, at the age of 22, that I'd done all the personal development I'd ever needed to do. And so that was my second run at personal development. And then my third happened just before I was 30. And that was the realization. And one of the quotes that I always put out there is that the day that you think you've done enough personal development is the day you need the most. And it's been a continual gradual change from then.
Getting back to communication, in terms of, you alluded to earlier that you get misunderstood at times, from whether it be with work colleagues or people in general. Where would you put yourself on the spectrum? And let's do a ranking system here. So something between 0 and 10 as a overall communicator. Where would you put yourself? 10 being, the supreme being, yogi, guru kind of person, and 0 being somebody who simply doesn't have any idea.
Can we create 2 different columns here?
No, only one. I'm setting the rules on this show.
Because you've got this whole, I'm a public speaker, right?
That doesn't excuse you from being a communicator, though.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is that if you took me in my private world, I'm a 3, but in my public world, I'm a 7, maybe I could call an 8.
Okay, so if we put those together, you're somewhere around 5, is that right?
Yeah. Damn you with your average.
Okay, so we're 45 minutes into the show now, and I'd like to start having a conversation with you. Okay. Can we try that?
Sure.
So the rules of the conversation is we're going to pick a topic each, and we're going to talk about it and share each other's thoughts and opinions and views on that particular topic, and see how we go around that.
Okay.
So what I've heard so far from you is fascinating, because I'm sure there's no one listening to this show who hasn't had, going through, or going to in the future have relationship issues. And I actually want to go back to a point about that situation with my mother. I want to share with you what happened, because when I went into that room and she responded in the way, I saw that as a huge opportunity for personal growth for me. Because one, I never had expected those words to come out of my mother's mouth. And secondly, I thought, okay, why did they come out of my mother's mouth? What was it that I was missing? What didn't I know? What was making her feel that way? So from that day onwards, and I told you categorically before we started the show today that I have no relationship with my mother today. And the basis of that is I arrived at a stage where I wanted to remove all negative energies from my life, and I didn't want to discount the fact that there was negative energy in my bloodline, and I didn't want to give those people a favor as a result of that, because of the things that have happened over the years. So I didn't have any favoritism when it came to expelling the negative energy from my life. So on that desire, I had to start exploring why that person was like that, and what I found out in a very short storyline was that it's a generational thing. And it's been interesting listening to you talk today about your girls and how that generational gap, how the young ones want to be rebellious because of what's going on around them today in this society, and how you as a parent reacted to that situation based on your, I guess, subconscious beliefs and how you were parented as well. I'm sure that had a huge thing to do with it. And at the end of the day, I think it comes back to a thing that I'm really doing a lot of energy on, putting a lot of energy on at the moment, is to get that complete understanding across life's full spectrum. And I've listened to you for the last 3/4 of an hour, and I thought, wow, there's a lot of similarities between Ugarte as a human being and some of the things that drive and have driven me in the past, in terms of, competitive spirit, wanting to share, I guess, information at a level that some people are not comfortable with. Let's face it, not everybody can be a public speaker or wants to be a public speaker, and some people don't have the ability to do that, although I believe everybody has if they put their mind to it, of course. So I think there's a lot of similarities and things that I'm listening to here. So I wanted to open up a Pandora's box with this conversation now and kind of talk a bit deeper about some of those things in terms of particularly improving, because I wanted to use this Humanity Inspires platform to try and, I guess, have a conversation with people that would inspire change in others. And I've always believed that by having a real, true, authentic, open, raw conversation with someone, I think that's something we're really missing in society today. We're too fast to be spending time on social media, putting likes and comments and whatever, but we don't actually sit down often with strangers and have really in-depth conversations. And that was one of the many, I guess, inspirations to start this particular show, that I could actually start having conversations with people around the world from different cultures and backgrounds to see where we can actually take that. So to wrap that part up, I wanted to ask you, from these things that you've shared with us today and the things that you've talked about from your history and all the rest of it, what are the things that you as a human being now sit down and say, right, these are things that I want to work on for myself. These are things that, and this is outside of your relationship with Christine and your kids. So this is all about you. What are the things that you feel are the things that you really want to focus on at the moment in terms of self-development?
Yeah. Can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, sure.
Was it that particular moment? So what was the catalyst for you finally saying that for now, I'm not going to be in contact with my mother?
So was there a specific second time where I made that decision? No, there wasn't. It was a continuous thing that's happened over decades, basically.
Because you left Australia young.
I left New Zealand young because I was a New Zealander. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And so you really didn't have direct contact with your parents, but the reason you came back to Oz was because of your father.
And mother, yeah, both of them were in hospital at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I left home when I was 15 and a half. And not only did I leave home, I left my country. So I went to the world alone and never went back. So my history with my parents has been one of separation by geography, as well as emotionally and spiritually as well.
What was the choice to come back? I mean, if you had left at the age of 15,
yep.
What was the draw or the need to come back? Was it for, to be able to settle and ensure that your life was fulfilled, knowing that you spoke to your parents again? What drove you to do that?
Yeah, great question. And perhaps one that a lot of males are facing with their relationships with their parents. I felt a sense of duty first and foremost, that as the only son who had been living overseas all my life and hadn't been there at other times when my parents' health was not so good, I knew this time was, categorically bad, and that they didn't have people around who were having the ability to spend the amount of time required to care for them in the way that they needed care. And I was in a position in my life where I could do that. So putting those things together, I hopped on a plane and came back to Australia straight away to take on that challenge.
Did you manage to have conversations with your father before he passed that gave you some settlement? Like, if your father was still alive, going through the same process was what happened to your mother, would you still be talking to him?
Yeah, we had, and that's why I'm writing the book, because it's a story called 25 Days That Changed My Father Into a Man, in my eyes, of course, and it also changed me into a man. So the reflection on that period, those 25 days, which were paramount in the relationship between myself and my father, was the fact that I had tried on a number of occasions, because whilst I had lived overseas for the majority of my life, when I did come back to visit for Christmas holidays or any other times that I did return to Australia, I made an effort to try and build a bridge to both my parents, and every time it failed. So I took away from that my inability to be able to communicate in an effective manner to be able to build that bridge. I took it upon myself. I didn't blame my parents for that. And I thought, okay, I'm obviously not talking in a way, or I'm not presenting this in a way that's making it understood that we can have a very respectful conversation around the issues that exist in our relationship, and that both parties can be heard over that. And it wasn't until my father was in a state of poor health where he felt very vulnerable that he actually started to open up. So we were able then to start building the bridge, and by the time he took his last breath, we had a fantastic relationship that had evolved through a very quick period of time, 25 days, and got to a stage where I basically took a huge breath as I drove that car back home that day after he passed, and said, I had the relationship with my father I always wanted.
That's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was groundbreaking, and I wanted to share that with you today, because in listening to all the things that you said about your kids, and the last thing you want them to do is turn around and tell you to piss off and that you're an idiot and all the rest of it. It's not about that, because I don't think kids actually think that deep down. They think they're only saying that from a place of hurt, as we all know, and with their ability at their particular age and how their brains are developed. And you said you've got different intellects between the different children, which is obviously the same for a lot of kids. I was never at a stage in my life, I believe, that I couldn't sit down and have that conversation with my parents until I was probably 40 or more.
Yeah.
I wasn't capable. I wasn't equipped. I didn't have the tools. And all those rebellious things you do when you're a teenager, that's just, deflection, isn't it? It's all that sort of stuff coming from peer pressure and all that. But I remember one night in, and I'll tell you this, I sat down with my parents, and this was soon after I'd come back to Australia to take care of them. And the other thing here that I want to share, and a lot of people in this position at the moment, I've got another friend at the moment who's listening to this show today, I'm sure of it, who's also at the moment not at the moment because I'm not any longer, but he's in a position where he's a grown man, a Kiwi living in Australia. He's got two elderly parents who are both sick as well, and he's in a 24/7 caring situation. It's an extremely difficult position to be in if you have never been a full-time caregiver before. And I'd come back from, and the full story of this is I had come back from being a homeless man for 18 months, living around the world as a homeless man. And that was part of my crusade to find myself and go on that journey. And it was during that process that I got this phone call to say your parents are in hospital on the Gold Coast and they may not live much longer, so do with that what you want. So I got on the next plane and I flew back. So I immediately went from this process where I was sitting on mountaintops meditating to being in this full-time carer capacity that I had no idea what to do and felt completely out of the water, with two people that I didn't have a relationship with who actually were labelled as my parents. And it was very confrontational, very, very confrontational. And as such, I was searching for answers, and as us men typically try to do, we try and solve all the problems and come up with all the answers. So every night I was at them wanting to have a conversation about our relationship. Well, here they were in very ill health and obviously focusing on other things. So I went about it all the wrong way. And one night I remember sitting down and like many parents of that generation, they turn the 6 o'clock news on, they have their dinner, they watch all the other shows randomly, you know, as the night goes on, and they go to bed, and that's their evening, right? And
Yeah.
I turned the TV off one night and said, okay, I want to actually talk. Like, can we have a conversation here? You know, like mum and dad and Mark, that's what I want to have here. And they looked at me, and you should have seen the look on their faces. And it was even the body language, the actual seating in the room. I was on one side of the room, they were on the other side. It was like all wrong, right? It was just all wrong. Anyway, I was going ahead because, like Ian, I'm competitive. I wanted to win this, right? And I said to them, look, I just want to have a conversation, and I want to have a conversation about our relationship. And my father's response immediately, without even taking a breath, was, so you're going to tell us we're bad parents? And I didn't say anything. I had a pregnant pause that lasted for about 30 seconds, I think. I thought, what do I do with that? Like, you know, he's immediately gone on the defensive and thinks that I'm going to have a conversation about that. And then I was waiting for my mother to go, and I was surprised that she didn't actually say that first. And then she said, so what do you want to talk about? In a very aggressive tone. And I said, well, just everything. I said, you know, I've lived all my life away from home, and I don't really know you two. You know, what do you do every day when you're well and you're not in hospital? And, you know, who are your friends? And what do you think about the world? And all that sort of stuff, you know. And then that conversation lasted about 3 minutes. And I got up crying and went into the bedroom and laid on my bed and said, that's it. I'm not going to break through this. It's impossible. And that's kind of where it went from until Dad passed away.
But you had those 25 days.
But I had the 25 days, and that kind of resurrected everything, because, you know, I was listening to you earlier when you were talking about, you know, helping your daughter ride a bicycle, and I was just thinking back to my own journey, and I never had that from my father. I never had any of that. My grandfather was the man that stood up and taught me how to drive a car, taught me how to build a tree house in the backyard, and showed me how to plant carrot seeds in the garden and grow food and stuff. That was my grandfather that did all that stuff, because my dad was never there for me. And someone asked me the other day on the boat, actually, they said, oh, would you like to go fishing? Because I've never gone fishing in my life, because I never had anybody to take me fishing or want to go fishing with me. And they looked at me and they said, well, how come you look like a stunned mullet? And I said, well, yeah, fishing's a foreign concept to me.
Pardon the pun, yeah.
Pardon the pun. I said, yeah, fishing's a foreign, you know, concept. What is that? It's about putting a I wouldn't even know how to thread a rod with a bloody line or whatever you do. And I just thought, you know, those are all the things that you miss out on. That, you know, my dad was, you know, I'm the same as you. I come from a middle class family, and my dad was working, my mum was working, and that time that you don't have your parents around for all those things that you'd love to have them there for, was essential to, you know, how I grew up, I guess. And my grandparents took up the slack, and therefore they were my true parents in my eyes. You know, I've never celebrated Christmas since I was 15 years old, Ian, and the reason for that is because that's when my grandparents left, and they were the only ones that inspired Christmas giving in my family. So it was a time where I actually now despise Christmas. I'm angered by it because of, well, the commercialism, but also the other side of it, that it doesn't, I can't have that feeling I used to have with my grandparents around, you know.
So your father, on the day of his passing, you know, they've done a lot of studies. A particular nurse that worked in the you know, the last days and lives of your patients, and she created like a survey, an unofficial survey of the things that on their deathbed, what were the things they wished for, or what they regretted. And most of them were regrets by not doing this, or not choosing that, or choosing money before family, or, you know, not travelling. Your father, was he conscious all the way close to his passing?
No. So what happened was, we had an extraordinary, those 12, it was like a lifetime in 12 days, 25 days, sorry, not 12. It was like a lifetime in 25 days. It was like every day something else happened within our relationship. And I'll just share the last night, because that was the significant one. So he was in palliative care, and palliative care. It just gives me a shiver down my spine even thinking about it, right? He called it, he made me laugh actually, because he said, this is just God's waiting room, this palliative care unit, right? He said, this is just rubbish.
Yep.
And my father wasn't a religious man at all, and coming out with that comment. Anyway, his room in this palliative care ward opened up to a beautiful courtyard, and it was done like a Japanese garden. And it was a serene place for a hospital. And I tried to get him out into this courtyard as much as possible because he was out of the sterile, hospital room and out in the daylight and all the rest of it. So for the last few nights of his life, he asked me if we could go out there at night time, because he loved he passed away in summertime, which is obviously hot, so he wasn't too joyful going out there during the middle of the day. And I would roll him out in his bed, and he was able to lay out there and just look at the stars and stuff. And on the last night, we had this incredible experience together where we started off, we'd been out there since late afternoon, so it was still light when we first went out there, and then the twilight came and it was beautiful. It was a magical evening with that kind of, orange glowy sunset and all that stuff. And then the stars came out, and there was just millions of stars above us. And I'd take him out of the bed and put him into one of those big chairs with a high backrest and all the rest of it, and he was very comfortable. He had a couple of blankets around him. And we were talking away, and we were having conversations about stuff that he loved to talk about. And then he went quiet, and it was around about 8 o'clock, I think, at night. And he looked up at the stars, and he had this gaze as though he knew where he was about to go. And there was this moment of about an hour and a half where we just sat there together, and literally right next to each other, like I had my chair right next to him, and I could almost hear him breathing, and he was just looking up at the stars, and his eyes were transfixed on the sky, the night sky. And I had this amazing kind of epiphany within myself at that time that, my father was sitting there knowing what's about to happen and where he's about to go, and he's visualizing this like he's actually having. And if you'd seen him leading up to that, as each day had gone past, he'd become physically and visually terrible to look at. He'd become a very sick and unwell man. And my father had been an athlete all his life, and right up until 65 or so. And he was now a withered old man who had black rings around his eyes. He'd lost a lot of weight. He'd stopped eating a couple of days before this. And it was only a matter of time. And he looked up this night, and all of a sudden he had this radiance about him. He had this energy like I hadn't seen in him in his entire life. Like I hadn't seen this in him. And he looked like a different human being. And I was kind of snapping my fingers to click myself out of this trance that I was perhaps in. And we sat there for this hour and a half, and I just let him stare at the sky. And I was just thinking, gosh, I'd love to know what's going through his mind. I'd love to know what he was thinking and all the rest of it. But I didn't intervene. I let him have that moment because I could see that it was something amazing was happening. And then I said, after a while, I said, are you ready to go back inside? He said, yes. And as I wheeled him back inside, so I put him back into his bed and started to wheel him inside, and his eyes were still looking up at the heavens. He was still looking up at the sky until the very last moment when we went into the room. And it was in January that he passed, and the Australian Open tennis was on TV at the time. So we had a ritual every night where we'd have dinner and then turn the TV on, and he'd watch his tennis, which he used to love. And we turned the TV on this night, and we watched the tennis together. And he'd normally fall asleep before the match finished, because he was tired and all the rest of it. But this night he stayed awake, and we watched the tennis, and then we got into bed, and we'd have a little bit of a conversation before we went to sleep each night. And on this particular night, he said good night, Mark, in a way that he never said it before. And it kind of really hit me. I thought, gosh, why did he say it like that? And then at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up out of my sleep by something. I don't know what it was. There was just a sense of something was going on. And I looked across, and Dad was there, and he was breathing, and he wasn't snoring like he did most nights, but he was taking deep breaths. And I just laid there awake for a while. And then about an hour later, he started to come to the end of life, and he went through a process with that. And I moved over from the bed. I was sleeping in a bed right next to him, and I went over to his bed, and I sat on his bed, and I held his hand. And I found found that to be extraordinarily confrontational because I'd never been in the presence of someone that had passed away before, and it's my own father as well. And I sat there and I held his hand and I just said to him, "It's going to be okay, it's going to be all right. Sorry." And he struggled. He didn't want to go. He was really fighting. And I tried to calm him as best I could and told him that he was a great father and that I appreciated everything he did for me in the last 25 days and that he had built that bridge that I'd always wanted, and that I'll never forget that from him. So he went, and after I'd said those words to him, he let go. It was amazing. It was really incredible. And he peacefully went after that, and I just sat there and held his hand and told him that I loved him. And it was the most beautiful thing that ever happened in my life. Sorry, mate.
You got both of us. It's so beautiful. One of the things I'm fortunate in my life about is that people sort of get drawn into my life for no particular reason or no outcome, but there actually ends up being a reason. And
yep,
it's fortunate. I'm fortunate for the fact that you came into my life for a practical reason of what we were trying to achieve at the time. But I've had some discussions with you that have been extraordinary, and no more than that one that I just heard your story there. I was going to lead into the next question was, what do you but you said you couldn't answer that. You'd like to have thought what he was thinking. What you'd like to know what he was thinking. But you'll probably never know.
Yeah, I'll never know. But I guess in terms of, it was such a, you hear all these cliche words, right? But it was such an authentic moment in my life that I'd never seen my father so transfixed about something that was making him feel so good. So I can't even begin to wonder what it was. And I would say in the last number of years, my spirituality has grown enormously. So I'm very open to all that kind of thinking around what it could have been. But I don't really care at the end of the day, because I saw and felt that presence of him in a way that I never had, right? So the answer's not as important today as it was perhaps at the time when I was trying to seek that answer. And maybe that's taught me something about myself, is that you don't always have to have the answer, and live in the now and take that moment. And that moment taught me about living in the now like I'd never have in my life, because, as that clock ticked around, and those moments where he was actually going through his passing process, talk about living in the now, right? Every single thing that happened, every expression on his face, every movement of his hand, he gripped my arm, he gripped my hand in a way that I never felt a human being do that before. And it was just extraordinary human connection to another person, regardless of the fact it was my father. That made it even more special. But just having that with another human being, in that sense of, and out of making love to a woman, I guess, in terms of, I had never had a connection like that with another, well, let's say a man, a human man in my life, and to have that kind of feeling was just extraordinary.
So, to go back to the question that you asked me before we went down this beautiful path was, what's it for me? And, you said earlier that the more that you hear from me, the more that you realise that we're very similar in what we're doing and how we've gone about life. And you've just made me extraordinarily emotional. Because, what you've just, that explanation of your father in the final moments of what you were able to achieve and still remember and still link into you is the answer to the question that you asked. What is it that I'm moving forward for, and what is it that I want to obtain. And for me, it's the two C's, the consciousness and the connection.
Yep.
I can say, hand on my heart, that my view of the world is that I'm connected to no one. I don't have the deep, unknowing spiritual connection to someone else on this earth.
Yep.
And I drive consistently, and my message is that we all want to be connected. We're all driven for connection. And here I am in that spot with Christine having a breakdown of connection, and we've had some extraordinary moments of love making and moments together. Yet I, as a person, feel disconnected to everyone around me, and it's an irony because I can connect with people on different levels, but when it comes to that longing oneness of being connected to someone like you have been, I haven't been able to achieve it. And that's where the consciousness comes in, that I'm working extremely hard right now into an opening of consciousness that I don't understand or don't know, and I'm willing to go down that path that may completely turn my world upside down. And I've started to work heavily with, and I don't condone this for everyone, it's the choice that I've made. I've started to work heavily with psychedelics to break this ego down, because this fucker of an ego that I've got controls every part of my being. And if I can stand back externally to watch what's going on within myself, to come up with the answers that allow me, or infiltrate, even whether I consciously am aware of it or not. But I really would love a place of acceptance. Like, I struggled with acceptance my entire life. And I'm not talking about people accepting me, it's me accepting others. I'm not sure how that fits into whether those are the answers that you have been or had been looking for as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to report back on that, if I may, because that's a really good thing to say and ask. The process that I had with Dad was one of reflection on who I was as a person at that time when that happened, and I'm talking about those last minutes of his life. Who was I at that moment? I wasn't a corporate guy working for DHL flying around the world doing multi-million-dollar business deals. I wasn't a tennis player. I wasn't a marathon runner, a triathlete. I wasn't anybody other than the son of Barry Philpott. And for the first time, my identity was linked to that moment in time that was about love. And that's all I can say about it, is because it wasn't, there was nothing else. I was stripped back to, and everything was so perfect in so many ways because my mother wasn't there and my sister wasn't there, and I was alone with the man that, was 50% of the reason why I'm on this earth today. And all of those things were in context of that moment, either during it or since, because I've had that chance to reflect on, and now writing the book again is bringing it all back, I guess, to that. And I actually journaled the whole time of those last 25 days, so I had everything written down. And I think, in going back to those comparisons that I alluded to about you and I, is that I was that guy that was chasing who knows what. Who knows what I was chasing. I was chasing the thing that wasn't achievable in so many different areas, and all the things that didn't count. And I'm not saying you're doing that, I'm just saying I did that. And you met my ex-partner, and that was another step in my journey to understand who I was in a relationship sense, when I was in a relationship, and what was right for me and what was wrong for me. And that was the final piece of the puzzle for me. So my father's passing was the first major step in the puzzle. The 18 months prior to that I'd spent as a homeless man traveling around the world was another major piece of the puzzle. And the third component of that puzzle for me was that last relationship. And it was from that I was able to build the foundation of the new life that I've created now. And I'm 55 years old, and it's taken me a long time to get to where I am today, but it's never too late. It's never too late. And I've had conversations with men recently in their 70s who have just had that a rising and awakening within themselves at 70 years old, and it's a beautiful thing to see, regardless of the age component. I think that's irrelevant, of course, to a lot of that conversation.
It is, because the fortunate part for them is that they have had that awakening.
Yes.
How many of us, how many men in particular, get to their deathbed not really ever finding that part of their life?
Yeah. And you would be the first probably to agree with me when I say that the work that we do on oneself is vitally more important than the effort we put in with others. And that might sound self-centered and selfish, but when it comes to being in a relationship, I've always said that until you've got your own shit sorted out, you're never going to have a successful relationship.
And that's exactly, because I could finish this relationship with Christine and go and find another one, but guess what issues are going to arise again?
Yeah, exactly right.
Exactly the same.
And I sit in front of you today. Well, I don't, but I'm virtually sitting in front of you today. And I've been repeating that cycle in relationships my entire life. And I can almost write a book about what's going to happen next, because that's the way that I've always been. But now I've finally broken the cycle, and the chains are off, and it's free, and it's, I can't explain the place I'm in now, but it's a completely different view on the world and life and everybody in it. So, but as you said, and I want to allude to, it's not a destination. It's an ongoing, continuous journey. And I'm not for one sitting here preaching that I think I've found the light, because I've found the key to the door. That's all I'm saying. And I've rushed through the door, And
there's a level of fear for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm prepared for it, but there's a level of fear of, well, I'm going to have to give up some good stuff here. So I'm not going to have to. It's the thought that there could have to be giving up. Like, maybe I don't have to, but I don't know the answer to that. And I am truly open to whatever comes at me, whatever, in however way.
How do you know you're open?
I won't know that.
Because you said I'm open to whatever comes my way. How do you know you're open, though?
Well, I know I'm open to it because I'm going down a path of uncertainty. I'm going down that path of uncertainty.
Yep.
How strong my conviction is to be open to the requirement of whatever comes at me, I won't know until I hit it. But there's one thing that Christine will tell you about Ian, that I fear nothing. There is nothing I fear. And fear for me is one of the most positive words in my vocabulary, because for me, if I feel fear, then it means that I'm starting to get challenged, that something's going to happen, something has to change. Whereas some people fear and they back away from it all.
Do you have many brothers and sisters?
Yeah, so this is the thing, this connection. I have no connection with anyone in my family. I have an older brother who's 9 years apart, and he's 9 years older than me, and then I have a sister that's 7 years younger. So 16 years between youngest and oldest, and I sit in the middle of it. And it's almost as if we were sort of not brothers and sisters, because we're so far apart that we were sort of like caregivers. And my brother, so the older that I become, the more I realise I need those connections. I've got a 74 and 75-year-old parents, and I've started to accept my mother is who she is. I'm starting to see my father from a different viewpoint as well. And I, up until only a year or two ago, would never have said, from when I was young, the last time that I said I love you to my father would have been very, very young. And I never said it up until a couple of years ago. And I realised more and more, not just the saying of it, but the actual feeling of, I'm just very thankful and grateful for how I was brought up, as harsh as that could have been. My father never lay a finger on me ever in his entire life. My mind said that he did, but he'd never physically done it. I was petrified of him. And that in itself is something that I'm working through at the moment, where I never really had a problem with it. Like I said a statement to, to this person Christine and I are working with now. I said, I'm just so happy that he brought me up that way. I'm so happy that it happened that way, and I'm completely comfortable with it. And she says, you shouldn't be. He abused you. He didn't know any different. He didn't know any better. But that's abuse. That's not right. If you saw someone doing that to their child, you would be not comfortable with that. And so you shouldn't be comfortable with it. But again, he did it in the only way he knew how to do it. And that was his form of love. Yeah. So there's this whole convoluted way of thinking about, okay, I used to think it was okay, but now I have to start thinking it in a different perspective. Not that it's not okay, but not that it is okay, but I then have to accept. So, it's just so not simple, isn't it? I mean, the more you go through, the more complicated stuff gets, eh?
And I think that's a lot about life in general, and I think one of the things that I'm practicing at the moment is really getting back to basics and stripping away all of these complex layers that we do put on life, because you're right, it is. It's whether it be a conversation that goes down the whole, like this one, in terms of getting deep, it is complex because all the different components are the fact that we are all different, yet we're all the same in all these other contexts of the words as well. But I'm finding that, I have a thing on my wall here on the boat that says, live simply, dream big, laugh lots, be grateful, show kindness and give love. And every day I get up and I don't just look at those words, I actually read them out aloud. And I read the context of what it actually means to me. And the conscious decision I made to go and live on a sailboat was one around, at the time I was on a journey of minimalistic lifestyle and continue to be so, because one of the great things that I learned about, another lesson I learned through that process with my father, was here he was in a palliative care ward. At the end of his life, he had, after he passed away that day, I wheeled out a small roll-on suitcase that you'd take on a flight with you, with his clothes and a toilet bag, and that was it, Ian. That was the end of his life, right? And it put into context for me what we actually needed, and those 25 days that we spent together, we never mentioned once anything about materialistic things. It was all about the memories of the people, the trips that he took, the connections that he had. He was an avid lawn bowls player. He used to go to lawn bowls twice a week. Those were his mates. They came and visited him in the hospital. You could see the glow in his face when that happened. It was all about the people. It was all about the memories, and nothing else was spoken about what his salary ever was, or and we hear this all the time, we read it in books and all the rest of it, but the reality is when it gets to that stage of life, it's so right, it's so right.
Yeah.
So why wait till we get on our deathbed till we start living like that? Why not adopt that today and say, right, these are the things that are critical in our life?
I think that's it's probably not a good example of it, because Elon Musk at the moment is ridding himself of all material things. Not sure he's ridding himself that much of everything, but at least the house that he lives in and the bits and pieces around. because there's a growth perspective. I look at some of the people that have made those movements towards consciousness, and that I can see. You look at it, you've got Jim Carrey there, and people think he's gone nuts.
Yep.
But I think he's just had that realization,
Yep.
So, and again, if your ego's, I think, one of the statements I make is you need ego, you have to breathe. But the fact that it controls your life needs to be controlled in itself. And so I don't think it's controlling the ego. I think it's actually allowing the ego to stand alongside you and not to transfer your thoughts into a different level. So you're conscious enough to do that. And then maybe I can sit on the side of a hill one day and stare at the stars like your dad did and go, I get it.
I find that a fascinating thing in itself. Just before I go on to that, I want to talk to you about a book called Be Nobody by Lama Marut. Really, really fascinating read about ego, and about how you correctly said that ego is required, but it's also a place and a time and a conceptualization of what ego actually is and what it does to you. And I found that I've read a lot of books about ego, and that was the most profound I'd ever have. So Be Nobody, it's called, by Lama Marut, M-A-R-U-T. He used to be a monk out of California, of course, the corporate guy that went and become a monk. Many of those stories around. But I want to talk about sitting on the mountaintop and all that stuff. I spent time, back in the day, I spent time with monks in Cambodia, and the conversation I used to have was, look, I can slot into this life of peace pretty easily when I'm sitting here in a monastery and stuff. But it's when I go back to that other world, how do I take the practices, and how do I actually exist in that other world, where there are, 24/7 mobile phones and all this other connectivity that destroys our well-being. And it was interesting, the response that I used to get from them. And I used to ask a variety of them, so I just didn't get one opinion. And the answer was, there's a choice. There's either that or there's this, right? and I used to think about that and go, okay, that's fairly blasé for them just to throw it out there like that. But the reality is, like everything we do in our life, there's a choice. Like there's a choice that you make, standing up to your fears and taking them on and doing whatever you want to do to become a better human being. Or there's a choice not to do it, and there's consequences around that choice, right? So it's understanding the impact of our choices in relation to those things, whatever it is that we're trying to work on in our life, I think is the great thing. And it's like anything that we endeavor to achieve, once we start getting results, then we're driven and motivated to keep going down that path. It's not unlike running a marathon, right? Once you get past those psychological barriers of what's been put in your mind, that there is actually a wall that exists somewhere along the line. There's no wall there at all, but in your mind there's a wall there, right? So all fascinating stuff. But so where does this go for you, Ian? What's the next 12 months of your life look like? Let's get the crystal ball out and tell me what's going to happen. So
the next 12 months is, as I said earlier, increased usage of natural chemicals.
Can I just ask why you chose that path? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening would like, okay, what was the rational decision behind choosing that process?
Because if I went down and did some meditation and was working through to work towards consciousness and moving the ego out of the way, I still have my conscious mind in the way that can start to play its game, and the ego could then drive as well. Whereas if I have the ability to knock that out and then see it from a different perspective, then I'm now no longer in, it's not that I'm not in control, but I'm actually, the computer, it's like working on a desktop, moving stuff around on your screen versus actually changing the code in the background. And if I've got a user that's trying to change code by moving stuff around the screen, the desktop, then that's not going to do it for me, because you know, the code doesn't want to be changed when I'm working on the desktop. So for me, it's, you know, you've got different levels of dosage. You've got your micro dosing, which is really, you know, it's just something that it's there so people around you can start to gauge on your awareness. And, you know, it's a feedback loop for me too. I need people to say to me, hey, you know, when you said that's sort of a pattern, or you actually changed. I noticed that normally you would act in this way, but this time you said that you did it that way. And then that starts to erase my consciousness. Then we have a therapeutic dose where you go in there and you take your time, you set time aside, you have someone sitting with you so that, you know, that they can ensure that everything's okay, and they serve you, and they observe the spirituality and the traditions of where it's all come from. You know, especially in Australia. I mean, Australia has the acacia bush. It's you know, it's twice as potent as ayahuasca. You know, so we've got it here in Australia. And then, so in the next couple of months, I will be working myself to physical fitness again. So I'm peaking my fitness and working within the next 2 to 3 months to go the hero's dose. And the hero's dose is, you know, you are going to go hard on this, and whatever comes of it, and you're going to have to live that. And so that's for me. And, you know, 12 months from now, I'd love to be able to tell a story that you told today, with and not to have the catalyst of not enough time left with someone to be able to build that connection.
Yeah, right. Have you started the journey yet with the psychedelics?
Yeah, I have.
You have? Yeah. Okay. Are you early in that process, or?
I'm probably 5-6 months in.
Okay.
Getting an understanding of the different bits and pieces, and you know, working with the right people. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is coming from a person that's never taken. I've never smoked. Didn't drink until the age of 19. I'd never actually had any alcohol, and I've never had any illicit drug ever up until about 5 months ago.
Okay. So, what else within that 12-month time frame would you like to see evolve in your life? Taking that connection thing as the pivotal crux of where you want to go, but what else do you see happening?
You know, I'm working. So let's talk. Are we talking about
any aspect of your life at all that you want to put out there?
I think I have a decent social commentary. Look, I have a generalist view of what happens around us all, and I'm still gauging what people are comfortable hearing and not comfortable hearing. So I'll be increasing my social commentary around stuff, very much like you do very well. The business, this business of ours is, you know, going gangbusters, and we're building a team, and my next 12 months is to exit this business. Sorry, my next 12 months is about being still in the business but not needing to be here. And that will then free up, it'll step up people to do what they need to do. And it'll mean that I can run autonomously without Ian's involvement. Ian doesn't need to make decisions. There are people that are in the benefit of everyone making decisions on the behalf of the company itself.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So if those two things evolve for you, then you would be in a sense of utopia with your life, do you think, in terms of having both those things come together?
No.
No?
No, I don't. That's a physical outcome of what my life looks like. I think the spiritual, emotional outcome of what 12 months looks like from now, I'm open-ending on. I don't know what that's going to look like.
Okay, so no predetermination of what's going to happen and where it's going to take you.
I'm not aware of any predetermined perceptions or expectations, but the interesting things that are happening for me continuously is that they are there when they do come.
Yeah.
perceive it like that. It's like finishing the Machu Picchu marathon. I had this view that at the end line that we would have the whole of Machu Picchu to ourselves, so 15 people could walk around on our own. But lo and behold, I finished a marathon and there's 5,000 people all over the place. I didn't realise I had that expectation until I got there. So ask me in 12 months, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's do that. I'd like to put a date in the calendar now where we come back and we revisit this conversation.
For sure.
Because that'd be really, really good. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to today's show would like to see where we're both at that time, because it'll be interesting.
For sure. Again, some of these conversations that I've had with you, this is now, somewhere that I don't often be able to go to with people and truly speak from to each other from a heart level. And today was just one of those extraordinary days, and so that will make me happy for a long time because it's a fulfilling conversation.
Well, thank you, because that's the goal of the show. So if I've done that, and I felt as though I have both, and you've allowed me to share, I'm very grateful for that. And all around, I think we hit the ball out of the ballpark. So,
awesome.
So I'll see you before 12 months, but we will put a date in the calendar to have another chat.
For sure. Thank you, Mark.
Ian Ugarte, thanks very much.
Cheers.
Well, there we go, folks. That was Ian Ugarte and Mark Philpott putting it out there. Hope you enjoyed that particular episode. If you want to be involved in the Humanity Inspires podcast and have real conversations, then reach out to me on social media and we will have a chat about you being on the show. Maybe you're looking for something along the travel lines. Well, head over to globaltravelchannel.com and find over 150 of my podcasts where I've been speaking to guests all over the world about their incredible travel experience. Many of them have changed their lives through the travel experiences they've endured. And if business is your thing, head over to theglobalbusinesspodcast.com. It's a business show where I talk to business leaders and business owners across the world about how they're navigating their way through COVID-19 and some of the amazingly innovative ideas coming out of people's business brains right now across the world. So there you go, plenty to listen to in the podcast world from us. Humaneity.com is the one we're on now. I'll put the links in the show notes for you to be able to check out the other podcast show. Until we meet next time, my name is Mark Philpott. I look forward to bringing you another podcast soon in one of my shows. Until then, I wish you all a very safe and happy week ahead.